Hello, everyone. Welcome to Washington Gun Law TV. I am Washington Gun Law President William Kirk. Thanks for joining us. Well, Dateline, June 12th, 2022. It is a Sunday, and yes, your United States Senate has been hard at work trying to figure out how to remove your Second Amendment rights. That's right. A deal has apparently been struck in the United States Senate today, where at least 10 Republicans have signed on to some legislation. Now, this is the type of legislation that has a high likelihood of passing. So we're going to spend a couple minutes talking about huge update. The United States Senate agrees on gun control legislation. Okay, so a few days ago, we did a video called How Bad Is It? And it was about all the loony ideas that had come out of the House of Representatives. And as predicted, yes, there was going to be all sorts of incredibly restrictive, incredibly unconstitutional gun control measures passed out of the funny farm, or what we call the United States House of Representatives. Now, in the Senate, where things have a tendency to be much more civilized and a little bit more realistic, we began to hear words that there was a group of United States senators, most of which I would point out are not up for re-election this year, so it certainly allows them to be perhaps a little more lenient in their loyalties in certain areas, but at least a small list of Republican United States senators were working with Democrats to come up with a comprehensive form of gun control legislation that they believe could pass out of both houses. Well, apparently today, June 12th, 2022, that agreement was struck. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back and we're going to talk about the video that we did before, where we were trying to talk about all these crazy ideas and how many of them are actually likely to become legislation. And then we're going to compare that with what's happened now today out of the United States Senate and see what is in the package and what is actually likely to come your way that will affect you, the lawful and responsible gun owner nationwide. Okay, the first piece of legislation agreed on, and we did a video on this recently, is, yes, a federal red flag law. Now, this is not going to be the feds mandating that each state impose red flag laws, but they are going to provide financial incentives and the funding necessary for the 31 states in the country that do not have red flag laws to implement them. And they will also allow the 19 states, including Washington State right here, that already has red flag laws, to enjoy the benefits of those federal funds as well. Now, I do encourage any of you who are living in a non-red flag law jurisdiction to carefully watch the video that I did before, because you need to understand the procedural and constitutional deficiencies that arise onto the respondent when subjected to a red flag order. So it's a very, very important thing that you all understand what is happening to not only your Second Amendment rights, but in many ways your due process rights. Okay, the next piece of legislation agreed upon is what's called mental health and telehealth investment. And what this is just a big fat pledge by a bunch of people to spend a whole lot more money in the area of mental health and telehealth so that mental health services become far more accessible to individuals. And I have absolutely no problem with this piece of legislation whatsoever. Now, what effect this is going to have, how the fund's going to be spent, where do the funds go, all of that, the devil is always in the details, but that is one of the other agreed upon elements of this new legislation. Okay, the next one actually has a pretty significant impact around the country, and it's called closing the boyfriend loophole. Now, under federal law, a person is disqualified if they are convicted of a domestic violence offense if the victim of that offense is a person who you cohabitated with, was actual spouse, or a person that you had a child in common with. Now, there was this loophole, supposedly, that if you had an old domestic relationship in which things turned violent, but you were no longer with that person, that would not necessarily count as a disqualifying offense on your ability to possess a firearm. That no longer will be the case. So we're going to actually do some follow-up on this. We're going to check out what the language of this legislation says, and we're going to get back to you, because I think that this could have a significant impact on people who may have some old domestic violence allegations from 20, 30 years ago involving perhaps an old acquaintance, an old significant other, not a spouse or anything like that. So we're going to have to pay careful attention to that. Okay, now the next thing was, and this is a bit of a compromise, I anticipated that there could be a significant push to increase the purchase age, especially for semi-automatic rifles, from 18 to 21. This despite the fact that the Ninth Circuit, the most liberal court on the planet, had already said, hey, that's unconstitutional. But hey, why let the law get in the way of your political talking points? However, what the agreed upon legislation is between the parties here is that there will be a significantly enhanced background check for those 18, 19, and 20, including a significant background check related to mental health for those in that age of purgatory when they are trying to buy weapons on that particular platform. Now, once again, what does this mean? How does it come into practice? How is it enforced? God only knows, and we'll learn as we go along. But this is, again, one of the agreed upon pieces of this legislation. And then finally, what I'm reading here is that they are clarifying the definition of a federal firearm license dealer. That is, clarifying the definition of an FFL. Now, I'm not really sure what that means because I got a pretty good idea what an FFL is, and so does every single FFL in the country. However, and if we go back and we look at some of the other videos we've done about the way the ATF is operating, this could be another situation in which we are seeing an expansion of a definition to bring more people, more activities under the confines of federal law. So what does this mean and how is it going to be implemented? That remains to be seen, but that is something that we're going to have to very carefully pay attention to. Okay, now let's talk about all the things that aren't in this legislation. Number one, there's no assault rifle ban. There is no semi-automatic rifle ban anywhere in any way, shape, or form. Number two, there is no magazine ban. As we know, those were the two big issues that were put. A federal ban on assault weapons, a renewal of the federal assault weapon ban, and a federal limitation on magazine capacity at 10 rounds. Neither of those provisions are anywhere in this agreed upon legislation. The other thing is that although there is going to be enhanced background checks for those 18, 19, and 20 years old, there is no federal legislation here which elevates the purchase age for anybody. Now, obviously, state law applies. And so when it comes to the implementation of red flag laws, when it comes to 18, 19, and 20-year-olds trying to buy semi-automatic rifles out here in Washington State, where I live, we already have those laws in place, and in some instances have had them in place for several years. Now, here's the thing. All they've agreed upon in principle is to what the legislation is going to kind of look like. But once they start putting pen to paper, once we start getting into all of the devilish details, once all the other special interests on either side begin to get their paws and fingerprints on it, well, that's where we could again see this fall through. Now, what do I anticipate is going to happen? Again, I'm going to go try to look into the Washington gun law crystal ball. I believe that most of this will probably be agreed upon and passed to some degree. I think there's a couple provisions here that could still drop off this legislation because I think that the two sides are going to have a real problem coming to some of the real details necessary to enforce some of this legislation. So, is this good news? No, I'm not saying it's good news. Could this have been a lot worse? It could have been a hell of a lot worse. Listen, for any more questions about this legislation or anything else related to your Second Amendment rights, you can always contact us here at WashingtonGunLaw.com, or of course you can call us directly at 425-765-0487. Now let's remember, part of being the lawful and responsible gun owner, like we talk about all the time here at Washington Gun Law, is to know what the law is in every situation and how it applies to you in any instance that you may find yourself. Until next time, thanks for watching and stay safe.